Today was day 8 in the Karen Reed trial, and we heard from 2 people today. We actually concluded the day in the middle of the cross-examination for Julie Albert. So we heard first from Chris Albert, and then we heard from Chris's wife, Julie Albert. These were both people who were at the waterfall. They both went home, did not go to 34 Fairview that night to continue the party. They went home, went to sleep, and in the morning, that's when they came to the 34 Fairview, Brian and Nicole Albert's house. So let's take each person individually, and I think that there's some very interesting observations to be made by their testimony, and we will see actually if some of my observations are going to come out during cross-examination. So we don't know yet, something to look forward to on Friday to see whether they're going to take the same observations that I made and make a point of it during cross-examination. So here we go. Chris Albert testifies the following. He owns this pizza shop that was right across the street from the waterfall. He was working at the pizza shop, and eventually he did come to the waterfall, and he joined everyone that was there, all the Alberts, Brian Higgins, John O'Keefe, Karen Reed. So he joined the party there at Waterfall. He acknowledged that he does know Brian Higgins. He knows all the Alberts very well. Obviously, they're his family. Now, the reason, and this is interesting, it makes you pause. The reason, allegedly, that they were all going out together was because it was Brian Albert Jr.'s birthday. So all the adults, all the parents, are getting together to celebrate Brian Albert Jr.'s birthday. But the one person missing from this outing is Brian Albert Jr. He decides to stay home. So here you have a bunch of people going out to celebrate Brian Albert Jr.'s birthday, and he's not even there. So that really, right away, strikes me as odd. But that is the story. Now, another interesting thing that came out is that he said that he noticed, and this is the first time we're hearing this, that he notices that when Karen Reed comes into the waterfall, she takes a glass from out underneath her jacket. It seems that she was like hiding this glass, which would seem to suggest that she took this glass, stole this glass from the C.F. McCarthy's bar, and maybe because she was not done with her drink yet, she brought it with her to the waterfall. So right away, painting Karen Reed in not the greatest light, that she would go and steal this glass and drink. Well, she did pay for the drink, but you're still not to take glasses out of the bar. And here she is taking it out of her jacket and now continuing to drink that drink at the waterfall. There's been some suggestions on cross-examination that we don't really know what beverage was in that glass, but I don't think the jury's going to think it's anything other than alcohol. I think that's what they're going to think. That is the very natural and reasonable inference about what was in that drink, certainly alcoholic beverage. So most likely the argument to say that we don't know what was in that glass, I don't know if that's going to really work that well. So she brings this glass with her. And also, why was she bringing this glass? If it's water, she can just get water at the waterfall. She doesn't need to bring her glass from C.F. McCarthy's with water to the waterfall. All right, so she takes out this drink from her jacket. She's drinking it. And he also says that certainly, like what everybody else said, Karen and John seem to have had a very normal relationship with that night. Doesn't seem like any major arguments or disagreements going on, so everything seemed normal there. Now, something interesting also that came out, and this is also something that I noticed, which was a discrepancy between Chris Albert's testimony and Julie Albert's testimony. And we're going to see whether the defense makes a point about this. I don't know if they're going to. I don't know if they caught this, but I certainly did, and I wonder if they're going to make a point of it. So this is what Chris Albert testifies. Chris Albert testifies that Karen asked afterwards to go to the pizza shop. Now, previously, we've heard testimony that there was some suggestion. It didn't seem clear who it came from, but there was some suggestion that they all go to the pizza shop. Nobody attributed that suggestion to Karen Reed. Now Chris Albert says that not only did Karen Reed, was she the one who asked to go to the pizza shop afterwards. And again, this is Chris Albert's pizza shop. Not only did she ask to go, but she asked a number of times. She really wanted to go to that pizza shop for some reason. And it's not clear why. Why would she want to go so badly to this pizza shop? It's one thing if, oh, where should we go? Okay, maybe let's try the pizza shop. And then if as soon as someone says, okay, that's not a good idea, why continue asking it? So, I don't know, strange suggestion there. However, he did say that Karen has to go to the pizza shop. And why? Why did she want to go to the pizza shop? And this is what Chris Albert's explanation was, and it's going to be different than Julie Albert's explanation, which is interesting. Makes you pause and think. So his explanation is that they had like this ritual, like this friendly type of ritual, that when somebody turns 21, they go and make pizza in the pizza shop. After it's closed to the public, they go into the store and they fire up the stove and fire up the ovens and they make pizza, like as, I guess, part of the celebration of somebody turning 21. And that's why I guess the suggestion was Brian Albert Jr.'s birthday, even though he wasn't there. That is why apparently they would even think about going to the pizza shop. All right. So keep that in the back of your mind as we're going to hear eventually about what Julie Albert said. Now, it's also interesting, by the way, that sometimes he refers to Karen Reed as Miss Reed, and sometimes, this is Chris Albert on the stand, sometimes he refers to her as Miss Reed, and sometimes he refers to her as the defendant. Why switching off between the defendant and Miss Reed? That I wonder if that's on purpose or not. Now, also, he also continually makes a point, and let me know if you caught this, he continually makes a point about how his son is in the Navy. Son's in the Navy, son's in the Navy, my son's in the Navy. And of course, that's the knee-jerk reaction here is that he's trying to show the jury that he's such an honorable family and that there's reasons to believe his testimony as opposed to any other testimony that's going to come out. So I imagine that that's why he keeps throwing in that his son is in the Navy. Now, he said that he was not interested in going to make pizza because he was in the middle of a weight loss challenge for charity. And that's why he said, nah, let's not go to the pizza shop. Now, I'm not so sure about that. I'm not sure if that really makes 100% sense. It makes sense if you wanted to go home because you're tired and you want to go to sleep. But to say that, well, I'm in a weight loss challenge, so I don't want to go there and make pizza, you're not the only person in the world here. You have a whole bunch of people. And if the suggestion from everybody is to go and eat some pizza now, so the fact that you're on this weight loss challenge and you don't want to eat pizza, why should everybody else lose out? And especially if this is a ritual and it is Brian Albert Jr.'s birthday for 21, and this is what you always do, why not go to the pizza store? And it's not like you can't handle being in the pizza store because you're on this diet, because that's what you do. That is your job. You're in the pizza store all day long. And presumably you're controlling yourself not to eat the pizza. So why all of a sudden now at night is it going to be so much harder for you after you just ate in the waterfall, by the way, to not eat pizza? So that didn't make so much sense to me as a reason why he would say no to Karen Reed of going to the pizza store. So something just doesn't add up to me in my mind about that whole pizza store exchange. All right, maybe you can let me know what your feelings are in the comments. All right, now he did say that somebody mentioned to go to 34 Fairview. He was not interested, and his last round that he bought for everybody was a round of fireball shots, and that was before they left. Now, he also says that his wife, Julie Albert, left a little bit earlier because she was having a terrible migraine. And that was because there was a band playing right there in the waterfall, and it was very loud, and it gave his wife, Julie Albert, a migraine, and therefore she wanted to go home because she wasn't feeling well because of her migraine. Chris Albert was one of the last people to leave the waterfall, along with John and Karen. They were also one of the last people to leave. Now, he decided not to go to 34 Fairview. He decided to walk home. It was about a 5-minute walk. He walked home. He was very cold. He ran upstairs, and he went to sleep. Now, it also came out that his son, Colin, was at Brian Albert's house. Colin was presumably celebrating Brian Albert Jr.'s birthday, but he was celebrating it with Brian Jr. at Brian Sr. Albert's home. So 2 different parties going on for Brian Albert Jr.'s birthday. Now, Chris Albert said that even though Colin was out having a different party with Brian Albert Jr., when Chris Albert came home, which was about, he said, estimated between 12:05, 12:10 a.m., about 10 minutes later, Colin came home. and he popped his head into the bedroom and said, just wanted to let you know that I'm home. Good night. I love you. Sleep tight. And that's how it sounded like from Chris Albert. Then the next thing we know is that he wakes up at between 8 and 8:30, 8-ish. That's what time he wakes up, between 8 and 8:30. Shortly after he wakes up, his wife, Julie Albert, comes home and informs him, and this was from his testimony, informs him that something happened to John. That's what he says first. Then he says that she informed him that John died and that he was found somewhere on the lawn. Now, I'm not a language arts expert, and I don't understand why he said it that way, but there's probably some analysis out there which can explain to you why Chris Albert would not just say that his wife came home and said, John's dead, or John was found dead on the lawn, instead saying something happened to John. It almost sounds like he's trying to create a distance between what happened to John and himself. But I'm no expert in terms of that language, so you're going to have to go to a different channel, which maybe will discuss this language issue. And I don't know if they're going to pick up on this. But that was just, I thought, interesting, the way that he expressed that his wife, Julie, told him about what happened to John O'Keefe. Then she said, we have to go over to Brian Albert's home. This is what she said. Now, she didn't explain why. Why is it so important that they go over to Brian Albert's home? Why was it so important? They have to go to Brian Albert's home. Why? Can anybody think of a reason why they have to run over to the Albert's home now? She was just there. And in her testimony, it's going to come out that she was there for about a half hour to 45 minutes. Why now do you have to get your husband, Chris Albert, and go over to the Albert's home? Doesn't seem like she needs to go there to speak with any detectives or police officers. That's not what she said. That's not what he said. But for some reason, they feel a need to go to the Albert's home. That's a question. And I wonder if that's going to come out during cross-examination. I'm not sure. I'm just watching this testimony, and that's what strikes me as a little bit weird. Why do you have to go over there? All right, let's continue. When they did go to the Albert home, they arrived. Everyone's at the kitchen table. And eventually, they did speak to the troopers, the state troopers, Michael Proctor, and another trooper from the state police. That was the extent of his direct examination. And now let's get into the cross-examination. So the cross-examination began with the fact that Brian has lived in Canton his whole life, Brian Albert, and shortly after John's death, all of a sudden he decides to move from Canton. Very curious. You have the Albert home, that beautiful home, and it was actually Brian Albert and Chris Albert's parents' home. Brian Albert is now living there for many, many years. And now, all of a sudden, after John O'Keefe dies, Brian decides to sell the house and leave Canton. That is really a coincidence, don't you think? Now, it came out in redirect that, no, the reason why Brian left is because Chris Albert also sold his home because his children are getting older, so they don't need as much space, I guess, or need as much of a big home. They can sell, maybe downsize, and therefore Brian got the same idea from his younger brother, Chris. That was the suggestion on redirect, but certainly a big coincidence that this Albert home, which has been in the family for so long, and all that sentimental value that you have, it's just, you can imagine it's going to be hard to just sell the home that you grew up in as a child, and then also that you lived in as an adult. And now that your children are getting a little bit older, it's not like your children are so much older. It's not like you need to check yourself into an assisted living home, and they still want to move for some reason. So I think that that's still a very fair question. Why did he decide to sell his home right after John O'Keefe died? All right. That came out during cross-examination. He also testified that that Chris Albert knows Michael Proctor. He's known him for 15 years, a long time. Chief Berkowitz is a friend of his, a friend of Chris Albert. He's known him for about 20 years. He's donated money to his campaign, which he ran for town selectman. He's a selectman now in Canton. And part of the jobs of a selectman he brought out is that they do oversee the Canton police. So there is some sort of relationship there between a selectman and the Canton police. He is friends with Sergeant Michael Lank. We've heard about this already from Sergeant Michael Lank's testimony, but he also acknowledged that, yes, he is friends with Michael Lank. He didn't want to say that they're tight, but they certainly are friends. Then he said, interesting, which came out, is that Trooper Proctor, right, interviewed Chris Albert. So this is a friend, right? They say they know each other for a long time. They're friends. And now Michael Proctor is interviewing Chris Albert about what happened or where he was that night or anything that he knows about that night. And the thing that was brought out is that if you're already friends with him, does he need to introduce himself to you? And apparently he introduced himself. Hello, my name is Michael Proctor. I'm going to ask you a few questions. Why would he do that? Unless you're trying to pretend that you don't know each other. It seems strange. Now, he also asked him, try to open up this line, would you consider the Proctor family a second family to the Albert family? And here Chris said no. And we know that the cross-examination here is going to go, well, there are people in the Albert family who've posted on social media that they consider the Proctor family a second family. That's how close they feel with the Alberts and the Proctors. But there was an objection to that question, and the objection was sustained. Now, another interesting fact that came out during cross-examination is that although Chris Albert lived on the same block as John O'Keefe for about 4 or 5 years, they never exchanged phone numbers until one night. Which night do you think that they exchanged phone numbers? That was January 28th. Wow, what a coincidence also. On that night, that is the time when all of a sudden Chris Albert wants to get John O'Keefe's phone number. Interesting coincidence. Now, again, it doesn't mean necessarily anything. Could be that's just they wanted to get together that night and therefore they exchanged phone numbers. There's nothing so strange about exchanging phone numbers with a neighbor. But it is strange when a few hours later someone's dead. So that was an interesting point that was brought out. He acknowledged that Brian Albert and Brian Higgins were friends. They know each other. And then he said, are Brian Albert and Brian Higgins friends? And he said, well, they know each other. That's what his answer was. And they said, you're saying they're just acquaintances? And then he said, well, I guess they're friends. He's like, you guess? You guess they're friends? And they said, yeah, they are friends. And then this is where cross-examination, you can get a little bit chippy and you say, was there something confusing about my question when I first asked it? And that's what he did here. That's what the defense attorney did here. He said, first he asked him, they're friends, right? And he tried to kind of walk away from that. Chris Albert tried to say, nah, they're just acquaintances or they just know each other. Because first he answered, yeah, they know each other. What do you mean they know each other? You know that they're friends. But he's trying to create a distance for some reason. So he knows what he's doing here, Chris Albert, but he got caught. And the defense attorney did a good job showing, let's be real here. They're friends, right? You acknowledge that. And then he just, to really dig it in to show the jury that he's really trying to be evasive here, he said, was there something confusing about my first question about whether they're friends, that all of a sudden it took me 5 other questions to get you to admit that they're friends? And of course, that question was objected to and the objection was sustained, but it's too late. The jury already heard it. So there are some times where you ask questions which you know are going to be objected to and there's going to be the ruling is going to be sustained, but still the jury gets your point and gets your frustration and gets the idea that this person is trying to be evasive. So that also came out. So we are finding some interesting things that are coming out during this testimony, and it's going to keep getting better. All right. So then he said at 9:45 p.m., you texted John O'Keefe while you were at the waterfall. And this is what he texted him. Get over here or I will F up your lawn. Smile emoji. So we're hearing, again, references about something to do with the lawn. John O'Keefe's lawn, and we're going to hear more about this as it goes on. And that's what he texted John O'Keefe. Get over here or I will F up your lawn. So making some reference to John being so particular about his lawn. But he did end it with a smile emoji. Then he continued on the cross-examination. He said, did you feel that John and Karen were intoxicated? He said no. He said, you just assumed that there was a vodka in that drink. It could have been that it have been water, and I explained that this is probably not going to work so well with the jury if you're going to try to make some sort of argument that there wasn't vodka in that drink. Okay, but the point is that Karen did not appear under the influence or did not appear intoxicated. That's a good point. And everyone has testified that Karen did not seem drunk or intoxicated or inebriated. She seemed fine. Then he says he started arguing about the time, the specific time. He said, you said that you were home already between 12:05 and 12:10, and we've got surveillance, which shows that you didn't leave till 12:15, which means you didn't get home till about 12:20, 12:23, and then you didn't get into bed till a few minutes later. Okay, so he kind of tripped him up on the exact times. That's not going to work. Like if the time was really off, like he said he was home at 12 and really he was home at 1:30 in the morning, okay, that's a good point. But to say that someone's a few minutes off, I mean, that's not really such strong cross-examination. All right, now, he tried to bring out the fact that if he was sleeping already, and then that's when Colin came and woke him up, so then he doesn't really know how long he was sleeping for. So how can you say that Colin came home 10 minutes exactly after you came home, if you were sleeping? All right, so he brought out some parts of that. Then he got into the lawn issue again. And this is where they gave, Chris and Julie Albert gave the nickname to John O'Keefe as Mr. Nevercracker. Mr. Nevercracker is from some sort of comic whose character really cares about his lawn being trampled on, and he's very particular about his lawn, right? Every neighborhood has some guy who's very particular about the lawn, and if you go near the lawn, they completely go ballistic. So they had this running joke that John O'Keefe is Mr. Nevercracker. Now, he went on along about this. He said that Julie Albert even saved his name as Mr. Nevercracker. And then Julie showed to Karen Reed that Julie saves John O'Keefe on her phone as Mr. Nevercracker, or that was his name on her phone. And he said that this really all started with and it was a pretty intense cross-examination with this line, which ended up, I think, flopping in his face. And this is just, I think, a case in which they just overplayed their hand a little bit. And, it's one thing that you've got some evidence of a conspiracy. You certainly have some questionable conduct, some questionable answers. Yeah, definitely there's something to hang your hat on. This is just called overplaying your hand. And I think that they just overplayed their hand because it seemed pretty clear by the end of the testimony today that this Nevercracker was really just a joke. It was really a joke. You don't joke to the person who's particular about their lawn to their face, right? This is a joke that the other neighbors have with each other. This is not something that you take a picture, unless you really are enemies. Then you would take a picture of you on their lawn and send it to John O'Keefe. Here, they took some pictures. Again, Chris Albert and his wife, Julie, took some pictures with them on John O'Keefe's lawn and then sent it to John. So that's not what you do if the person's really a Mr. Nevercracker. If this is a guy who's really particular about his lawn and really hates it, the only reason why you would do that is because you really hate the guy. And from all accounts, they're hanging out the night before and everything's fine, seems like. So this was just simply overplaying their hand. And now what they should do, I think, is just completely walk away from this whole issue. Don't bring it up again. You lost it. Don't talk about it again. You thought it was going to be an issue, but it's not. It seemed pretty clear from the testimony that this was just simply a joke that they all had together. Nobody took it seriously, and everything was fine. All right. So that's what I think about that thing. But there was some points where it seems that the defense attorney was trying to make some really strong points of the cross-examination, but it all really just flopped in his face, I think. So that wasn't a great look right there. Okay. So now let's move on. Oh, one more point. One more point was that when he was talking to Trooper Proctor, when Chris Albert was talking to Trooper Proctor, he never mentioned the fact that Colin was at the Alberts' home that night. Isn't that a coincidence that you forgot to mention that? So that is a good point. And that was how he ended his cross-examination, that you did not tell Trooper Proctor that. All right. So that was a good point that he ended off with. And all right. So now we had the redirect. The redirect tried to rehabilitate some of the parts and really did do a good job of the Nevercracker stuff. And also tried to give an explanation why Brian sold his house after Chris sold his house. Again, I don't think that's really a great explanation. There's something more. It just feels that there's something more going on. All right, now let's get on to Julie Albert's testimony. And let's see if there's some contradictions between Julie Albert's testimony and Chris Albert's testimony. Some things that I think I had some observations about. All right, now the first thing she says is that she is close friends with Jennifer McCabe. So she's not trying to ignore that fact. She is close friends with Jennifer McCabe. And she also came out during her testimony that actually Brian Albert Jr. was not turning 21. He was turning 22. That's according to her account. So if according to her account he was turning 22, not 21, then the whole ritual idea that when somebody turns 21, you go make pizza, that doesn't make any sense. That completely falls flat on its face. If what she's saying is true, that he was turning 22. All right? So that was the first observation. And she also testified that Karen Reed did have this glass that she hid in her jacket from what it seems like from C.F. McCarthy's and brought it to the waterfall. So again, corroborating the evidence that she was the type of person that she is. That she would just steal this glass. All right. She left about 10, 15 minutes after John O'Keefe and Karen Reed came to the waterfall because of this migraine that she had in her head. And it was because of the band. She also testified that there was no winter jacket on John. John was not wearing a winter jacket. And this is what really everyone was testifying about. John was not wearing a winter jacket. And that's also going to, again, play into the fact that the paramedic said that there was a winter jacket, and that's the same paramedic that said that he heard Karen Reed saying, I hit him, I hit him, I hit him. So his memory is obviously not so great. And that's the point that the defense attorney is going to make. All right. Now, this is what her account was about Karen Reed asking to go to the pizza store. She says that Karen asked to go to the pizza store and make pizza. Why? So she says nothing to do with this ritual when somebody turns 21. That was all Chris Albert's story. According to Julie Albert, the reason why Karen Reed asked to go to the pizza store is because it's something we frequently do at the end of the night if we are hungry. So it appears that this is something that these friends do all the time. Yeah, we're all hungry. You know, Chris Albert owns the pizza store. We can get in. Let's go make some pizza because we're hungry. Nothing to do with rituals, nothing to do with birthday parties, nothing to do with that. So there you go, right out of the gate. There's a contradiction there between why they would go to the pizza store and make pizza. All right. Then she said that she was home, but she did not go to sleep until Colin came home, right? Some mothers are like that. They just can't fall asleep until all of their children are back home. So she didn't go to sleep. Colin comes home, and this is what she said. Listen to this. Colin comes home and asked if she was feeling better. So full stop. 1 second here. Colin was not with them at the waterfall, right? So how did Colin know that she got a migraine and that she wasn't feeling well, and that's why she went home? Did she text Colin that? That is fair game. If she texted Colin that, for some reason, she wanted to tell her son, who's enjoying a party at Brian Albert's home with Brian Albert Jr., and she wanted to tell him, oh, by the way, your mom has a headache or migraine. I'm going home to rest. It's possible. Let's see the text message. If that didn't happen, there's a real problem here. How did he know that she had a migraine? Unless he opened the door and saw that his mother was just completely beside herself and out of it. But that doesn't seem the way that she says the story. He just poked his head in the room and said, are you feeling any better? How does he know anything? So that, to me, was a big question. How did he know anything? Or according to her story, how did he know anything? He wasn't at the bar. He wasn't at the waterfall. How did he find out that his mom had a migraine? All right. So here's also where it gets a little interesting. She says, okay, she went to sleep. Colin came home. Now she can sleep. She falls asleep. She wakes up at around 8-ish. Now remember, let's keep the timelines straight here. Chris Albert said that he woke up between 8 and 8:30. All right. Now here's Julie Albert saying that she woke up at 8 o'clock. And she did something that she always does. So now apparently there's another ritual. All right. But this is Julie's ritual. Julie's ritual is that anytime it's Brian's birthday, what she does is she goes to Dunkin' Donuts and she buys 6 donuts. Why 6? I don't know. This is her ritual. She goes and she buys 6 donuts from Dunkin' Donuts and she leaves them for Brian Albert Jr. with a card. Happy birthday. All right. That's what she does. That's what she's done for years, and that's what she continued to do today. Now, stop for a second. When she woke up, she testified that she saw that she had a missed call from her good friend, Jennifer McCabe, at 6 a.m. Okay, so 6 a.m., she gets a missed call from Jennifer McCabe. But she didn't call Jennifer McCabe back. So she wakes up at 8 a.m., sees her phone. She's got a missed call from Jennifer McCabe, her good friend, 6 a.m., when the night before they were together till late, which no reason why anybody would not want to sleep in today, right? But Jennifer McCabe, for some reason, called her. And I imagine, I don't know if this is true. This is just speculation. I would imagine that she called more than once. But let's just even assume that she only called once. So Jennifer McCabe calls once, and her good friend, Julie Albert, decides not to call her back. Okay, that is questionable. Why not? You see your good friends calling you at 6 a.m., even if you weren't out late the night before. It's a Saturday. Why is anybody up at 6 o'clock in the morning and you're getting a missed call from a good friend? Why don't you call them back on your way to the Dunkin' Donuts? Say, hey, just doing my regular ritual that I do every year, buying 6 donuts for Brian Albert Jr. What's going on? I saw that you called at 6 a.m. Is everything okay? But she didn't call. Okay, so that's a questionable. Now, she goes to the house. She's leaving the donuts in Brian Jr.'s car. That's what she testified to. She was going to the car, it seems like, to leave Brian Albert Jr.'s donuts there. That's what it seemed like. Maybe you can listen to it and you'll decide that no, she was actually going to go in the house. But it didn't seem that way. It seemed that she was going to go leave the donuts in his car. And she knew the car was open, I guess. I'm not sure. So, and then what happens is that Brian Albert Sr. sees her and tells her that she needs to come into the house for a minute. So she comes into the house because Brian Albert Sr. invited her into the house. Everyone's visibly upset. And Jennifer McCabe then starts speaking. So Brian Albert says, you need to come in the house. We need to talk to you. She brings her in the house. He brings her in the house and then lets Jennifer McCabe talk to her. Jennifer McCabe says something happened to John. Then I asked her, is he okay? And they say, we don't know. And she says that she was there about 30 or 45 minutes. Now, what more is there to talk about for 30 or 45 minutes? And she didn't say. So she didn't say anything about what they spoke about for 30 to 45 minutes. What were they talking about? She didn't explain. The only conversation that we heard was, something happened to John. Is he okay? We don't know. That doesn't take 30 to 45 minutes. So what else did you guys discuss? Not sure. All right, maybe that will come out during cross-examination. Then she says, I went home to wake up my husband and tell him what happened. So now let's understand the timeline here. She says that she wakes up at 8-ish. She goes to Dunkin' Donuts. She gets donuts. That takes some time. She brings the donuts to 34 Fairview. Then she stays in 34 Fairview for about 30 to 45 minutes. So where are we right now? Let's say she woke up at 8 a.m. Okay, let's just say 8. When she says 8-ish, it means 8. It's at least 8:30. At least. Maybe even most likely closer to 8:45 because she was there for at least 30 minutes and she also went to Dunkin' Donuts first and it took her some time to get there. So let's call it 8:40, 8:45, which is the earliest that she would have left the McCabe house. She goes home to her house. That may take a few minutes also. And then she says that she wakes up her husband, which is closer to 9. Now, Chris Albert said that he woke up between 8 and 8:30. And it seemed from Chris Albert's testimony that his wife did not wake him up. And from Julie's Albert's testimony, it seems that she did wake him up. Even if she didn't wake him up or she did wake him up, if they can get their story straight about that, still the timing is certainly off. He said that he wakes up between 8 and 8:30, and according to Julie Albert, she went home to wake him up, and that was after 9, around 9, and that's the earliest. So I thought that was also an interesting part there. They return home for a half hour. They decide that they have to go back to the Alberts' house. So Chris wants to go back to Brian Albert's house. After Julie Albert has been there already for a half hour, 45 minutes, she comes home to Chris and says, we have to go to Brian Albert's house on 34 Fairview. Well, I'm not sure we spoke about this. So they go back to Brian Albert's home. They're there for about a half hour. He's asked, they asked Julie, this is all on direct examination, by the way. Was there anything out of the ordinary there? Was there any signs of any struggles or fights? Did anybody have any bruising on them or injuries? And she says, no, everything looked normal. No one looked like they were in a fight. Everything looks completely fine. All right. And then she says that a few days later, the state troopers came to speak to her. In cross-examination, right away, he says, hold on a second. It wasn't a few days later, was it? It was actually 2 weeks later that the troopers decided to speak to you. So the cross-examination starts off that way. Then she says, the cross-examination continues and says, do you know Michael Proctor? She says, yes, she does know Michael Proctor. And Michael Proctor is the brother of Courtney Proctor, right? And Courtney Proctor, you are very close with. So Julie Albert, you are very close friends with Courtney Proctor, who is a sister of Michael Proctor, who is investigating this crime. You also have a sister, Jill Daniels, and Jill Daniels is also best friends with Courtney Proctor. And you would even provide child care for Courtney Proctor. And she did provide child care for Courtney Proctor in 2019, 2 days a week. And she also knows Michael Proctor's sister, Elizabeth. So Julie Albert is very connected to the Proctor family. She's been to the Proctor's pool a dozen times. So she's even they're that close that they even swim together. And then he asked her, how often do you talk on the phone to Courtney Proctor? And she said very rarely. She talks very rarely. Mostly she text messages each other. And then he said, well, between February 1st, 2022 and September 6th, 2022, you spoke to Courtney Proctor 67 times. Are you sure you want to stick with the story that you very rarely speak to Courtney Proctor on the phone? Because the records here show that you spoke just between February 1st, 2022 and September 6th, 2022, you spoke 67 times. And then she said, well, she doesn't recall. And that's how the rest of the questions ended up being answered with she doesn't recall. The day that Karen Reed was arrested, very interesting. The day that Karen Reed was arrested was February 1st, 2022. That day, Julie Albert spoke to Courtney Proctor for 12 minutes. And he asked her, what did you do? What did you discuss? For those 12 minutes that you were talking to Courtney Proctor, what did you discuss? And the answer, I don't recall. Now, such a major event like this, which happened in front of your brother-in-law's house. And now someone's being arrested for that. Karen Reed, a friend of everyone's. The good girlfriend of John O'Keefe, who's a friend of everyone. And you call Courtney Proctor and you don't remember what you spoke to her at all? You don't remember even what the conversation was about? Interesting. All right. And then she says, now, on February 2nd, 2022, was the day that Karen Reed got arraigned. And then the records show that you spoke to Courtney Proctor. Again, Julie Albert spoke to Courtney Proctor 3 times that day before the arraignment. Do you remember what that was about? No, I don't recall. And then she said you spoke to her for 27 minutes after the arraignment. Do you remember what that was about? No, she doesn't recall. So very fishy stuff going on. It's possible people don't remember every single conversation they had with people and friends. But usually when significant events happen, and you're speaking to your friends about it, you would assume, and this is probably what the jury is assuming, is that you would assume that it had something to do with the day's events. It had something to do with Karen Reed, something to do with being the investigation, something to do with what happened, right? You weren't talking about going out for lunch or walking the dog together. Most likely you were talking about something to do with this investigation, right? And you were on the phone for 27 minutes after her arraignment and 3 times before her arraignment. So those were some good points that were brought out during cross-examination, and that's how it was left. So that's what we're left with at the end of day 8, and we will see how this all continues in day 9, which will start tomorrow, Friday. So that will be it for today. Thanks for watching. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, like, and we will see you next time.